What's up, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good to see you. I'm doing well. That's a familiar looking room. I've seen some live streams in there.
Yeah, this is pretty much where I write music, hide out when I'm in trouble, just escape basically from from the rest of the world. There's one window in front of me I've never seen the light of day through it because I put a big thick curtain over it years ago. So that's nice. It's like this cave vibe, and I can change the lights and stuff. So I can, depending on moods, I can at least, update the look back there a little bit at least.
Well, it looks good. It looks cozy, you know. I would
Yeah,
I
man.
would retreat in there too.
Well, it's freezing. This whole week in Nashville is like brutally cold, so it's nice to just be inside in the cave, just hiding out.
Well, here he is, Shaun Morgan from Seether. Thank you, man.
Hey, thanks
Uh,
for having me, man.
I'm super excited because this is my first time talking with you, but I've been there from the beginning. I remember playing Fine Again as a single when it came out way back in the day, and it seems like such a long time ago, but then it seems like it wasn't that long ago. How's it feel to you? Looking back that far, what does that feel like?
It's we're coming up on I think 20 years next year since the release of that album, which is crazy, man. You think um to still be around here 20 years later doing it and still being successful and still having a fan base and still being able to put out music it's been awesome. It feels sometimes like it was just yesterday. Other times it feels like it was so long ago. How do we even remember it? But I tell you what, the older you get, the faster the years are rolling by. So it's starting to feel like it was just yesterday more and more often because, you know, I can't believe it's been 20 years that have gone already. You know what I mean? That's insane. Coming up in January of 2022. So give or take. So it's been 19 years. Let's not be hyperbolic, but almost 20 years that we've been in the States doing this, and yeah, man, things are going strong. So we feel good. It's one of those things that we've had so many bands that we've toured with in the past that we thought were good bands, that were good guys, had great songs that just sort of fell by the wayside. So I don't know what we've done differently, but it's good to be here at least.
Or can you even like relate to that guy you were back then? I mean, when you
Oh,
sing a song, when you think about what was going on, I mean, can you relate to that?
um, I certainly would go back and give myself some advice, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's always. I mean, you don't ever. I don't think lose parts of yourself. I think you try and grow the good parts and sort of diminish the bad parts. You know what I mean? You sort of look at yourself and I don't know, subconsciously do a pro and con category and you go,
Sure.
okay, well, these are the good traits. Let's try and expand upon those. And then on this side, let's try and diminish those and gradually they'll never be phased out, but you can certainly, you can keep them under control. And like back in the day when we started out, it was all about the rock and roll lifestyle. You know what I mean? We dove in head first and lived that crazy life. I mean, there were times when our tour manager would go to bed and we were at a hotel. We would just take the RV and just pick people up around town and have this massive dance party in the RV. And I'm like, God, dude, now I would never dream of doing that. You know what I mean? But it was like this surreal experience. Um, and it felt like to really enjoy it, you have to give it every single ounce of your enthusiasm and energy. So
Sure.
if I could go back now, I would have been a little bit more fiscally responsible. I would have been a little bit more physically responsible as far as the amount. We had a conversation with some of the band guys the other day, and it was like, imagine you could go back and just say, let's call it 20 years. And in those 20 years, if you could have a warehouse and you can lay out on the floor every single drug, cigarette, booze, anything you've ever put in your body that was negative and bad for you, if you could lay them out on this floor, what would it look like? And it's pretty scary if you think
Wow.
about it.
Yeah.
If you think, I mean, how many possibly thousands of beers, how many hundreds and hundreds of handles of vodka, how many, I mean, ounces, pounds of blow. I mean, it gets crazy if you think about it that way. So I'm thankful that I come out the other side, and I'm getting more and more of a handle on again those bad sides, the dark stuff, and trying to focus more on being positive and being a good person. Um, Although having said that, 2020 was a pretty rough one to try and maintain that positive outlook. You know what I mean? It was kind of um, I think everybody was in some sort of boat that feels this way, but I was hit pretty hard by it, and um, I'm now refusing to let 2021 be a bad year. So far so good. We had a bit of a rough start in the first couple of weeks, but we've managed to turn around, and we parted ways with our previous management, and we've now found new management. So yeah, things are looking good for us, man.
Well, let's talk about the latest album, CV's Pacem Parabellum. Am I saying it right? Because I've heard different
Well,
takes on it.
I believe you can say Vis or Weiss, but other than that, you got it right. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I honestly have only said it a handful of times. I just liked what it meant, and so it was like.
Yeah.
But I went online. I was like, well, hang on, just before I go out and start talking about this, I have to learn how to pronounce this properly, because I did a bit of Latin at school, at high school. It wasn't like a course of Latin, but we were exposed to it briefly, and there was the opportunity to take a Latin class, and I think that would have been a waste of time, to be honest, unless you went into some sort of business where Latin phrases and Latin is more popular. Like, I think law uses a lot of Latin still, but so we said the Lord's Prayer every Monday and Friday in Latin. So we kind of got it. I always thought it was kind of a cool language. I knew it was very, very difficult, but I thought that the title was good because I didn't have one, and we were basically we were about to go into mastering, and this was the first time I didn't have a fleshed out idea for an album title. So I basically sat on the internet, and I just went, because so when you're out of ideas, the internet at least has a trove of inspiration and knowledge. So I was looking for things that would apply to how I was feeling. I was looking for idioms. I was looking at just sayings, because it's all the previous album titles I've come up with, but for some reason this time I had a bit of a block, and I just happened to end up on this Latin website, and there's a bunch of Latin phrases, and as I went down, I was like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense, but it's interesting. And then I just hit me the Parabellum one, and I was like, okay, I like what that means. And at the time, it kind of summed up for me how I felt about a lot of things, and what I sensed society was moving towards, and it was, I mean, this is before all of the unrest started happening last year, and before all of the craziness, and it was just, but I kind of had this sense of it was going to be heading in that kind of a direction, because it didn't seem to be slowing down, with people's emotions running so hot, and just the inability for differing opinions to sit in the same room and not want to throttle each other. I was like, that doesn't bode well for the future. And as unfortunately, it was a little prophetic, which I would never have hoped it would be. I would have thought that hopefully the title would be, it would be my little take on whatever, and it would be misplaced, and it wouldn't be quite as applicable. So that kind of was what it was about. It was a lot to do with the subject matter of the songs, my disdain and distaste and utter hatred for social media, and just society in general, seeing how, in my mind, and there's many aspects to it, and many factors that lead to it, but what I see is, and it depends on where you live. So I mean, but it's my perspective. I lived in Los Angeles, and there was no community. There was no community sense. You couldn't go to your neighbor and borrow some sugar. We had a neighbor we did blow with, and that was weird. So, but there wasn't like this community sense. And then I moved to New Hampshire, and there was a real sense of community. It was more down to earth, salt of the earth people, and it was a very different kind of experience. And then I moved to Nashville, and the neighborhood I live in is, everyone's kind of all right, but nobody's really friends with us. You know what I mean? And it's not, by the way, it's not that I'm out there like, panhandling for friendship. It's not something I need or not, but I just think that in general, there's less of a sense of giving to society, giving to somebody else, and it's more of a furtherment of oneself. So if you look at, for example, I've been saying this stuff before the documentaries are starting to come out about how social media is evil and bad and addictive, and really, I have a teenage daughter who I've seen grow up in that era, and I've seen the negative effects that it's had on self-esteem, and really unnecessary effects, because none of it's real. I mean, really, it's all pretense and facade, and trying to pretend your life is better than everyone else's, and whatever, what have you. But so there's a lot of that, and for me, you can take the saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. You can take it one of two ways, or I mean, you can take it any way you want. And I like that. You can take it from a pacifist side, or you can take it from an aggressive side. And I think really it doesn't allow you much room to sit on the fence. You know what I mean? And I think that that's kind
Yeah.
of what I was shooting for, is that it needs to engage you somehow, to where, oh, you don't agree with it, or you do agree with it. And I think those are the two, you know, it's I don't know. It was just something that I thought sounded cool. It was maybe a little bit. I didn't want to be pretentious, but you know, there's there might be an element. I don't know. It's just, I felt that the Latin version had so much gravity to it, and it really felt to me like it was the kind of, even the start of 2020, end of 2019, it was starting to see, um, you know, just as far as they talk about societal unrest, but it just started to feel to me like that. It just made sense, you know.
Well, I think the title fits the album perfectly because it carries a lot of weight, and the album is a lot heavier than a lot of the stuff you've previously done, which I think actually started with the last album, Poison the Parish. I think it kind of gravitated towards that, and now this sort of continues that. One thing I noticed about both of those is that you produced both of those. Was
Yeah.
that a conscious thing that let me do it because I want it to be this way? Is that what that was?
Well, the truth is, I mean, we've always kind of had the heavier side to the albums, but when we were signed to Wind Up Records, for example, their main focus was on releasing some of the softer, more accessible songs. Rather than putting us in a heavier category, they'd rather put us in more sort of a, I wouldn't say middle of the road, but more like an alternative type vibe. And that's fine. You know, if you think on that first album you mentioned, Fine Again was a single. Gasoline was a single only after I really, really begged for it. And then, you know, Broken became a single. So it was really kind of, it was, and Driven Under. So it was not the heavier side of that album. It was really the more, I don't know, I'd say melancholy and accessible side. And that was what they felt was the best way to promote us. So that was kind of that album. And the next one, it was the similar type of theme. And then we worked with numerous producers along the way. And my favorite producer was Brendan O'Brien. And he did, you know, I think he did
Yeah.
Holding On to Strings, and he did Isolate and Medicate. And those two, you know, they were great, but I learned so much. And the approach there, I think, was more of kind of glossy, getting a glossy, shimmery type of sound, if that makes any sense. It wasn't really raw. It wasn't very rough around the edges, and it kind of presented us in again. As great as the songs turned out, I was never really a big fan of the mixes, because it felt to me like the true nature, the true anger of the songs and the band was being kind of dampened, so that it would be easier to listen to, you know. So and then the singles were also chosen to be real poppy type stuff. But you know, I listen to a lot of music, and there's songs that are real heavy on all of these albums, but then there's always a pop element to some of the other ones, and it's, you know, it's kind of, because you want the songs to be memorable, and if somebody hears them, you want them to be able to hum along or sing along. So, but the label's choice was always to do that, to err on the side of what is the softer side of this band. Let's not really expose the heavier side. You know, and you could argue that Remedy and Fake It were heavier songs, which I was grateful for. And then then you get Country Song was kind of a little bit heavier, but they really liked to head in that direction. But then we were sold to Concord Records, and we had a whole different team of people there, and we didn't have an A&R guy putting his thumb or his boot on my throat, telling me I didn't know how to write songs. We had an A&R guy who I'm still great friends with, who says to me, you know, look, I know you know what you're doing. Just go and write the songs. And when you're done, send them in, and we'll make an album. He's never really been one of those guys who feels the need to inject his opinion into the songs, and so that he can feel like he earned his paycheck, you know. And I think for a lot of producers, that's the thing too. They like to use guitars. They like to use tones that they know that they've worked in the past. And so often you'll have producers that'll produce 3 or 4 very different bands, but they all sound the same because they've used the same drum kit, the same guitar rigs, the same everything, even the same guitars. And that was, you know, for example, Howard Benson, we worked with him. And that was something that I learned, was a lot of producers like to do it. They like to have their sound rather than the band sound. And so again, that's another thing I took away from that. I don't want that. I want our kind of, I want us to be presented a lot differently to what we were in the past. And then again, so Brendan's kind of shimmered things up and added some percussion stuff. And it was a little bit more, to the ear, it was a little bit more colorful, I think, but I don't think it made or broke the songs as far as what was added or what was taken away. So then fast forward to this, the last album, Poison the Parish, where I said, look, I think I'm comfortable producing this. We had management at the time that was not so sure about that, and they kind of naysayed me a bit, and it sort of threw my self-esteem off a little bit, to be honest. But I insisted until they said, okay, well, we believe you, but they sort of, were crossing their fingers kind of thing behind their back. So we went in, and the real thing about it was the key was to find an engineer that could make the sound that I'm hearing in my head, not tell me how it should sound, but if I say, no, I need this, then they go, oh, cool, let me help you find that. And so Matt Hyde he's a producer in his own right. He did, Monster Magnet, he did a Deftones album, but he came in and engineered, and it was awesome because it was just mostly the two of us. It was because at the time we were still three guys as well. So it was a 3-piece band. I'm in there all day, every day for 2 weeks playing guitar or doing vocals, and it was awesome. And because he was mixing and I was there, and both of us were in the room at the same time, and there was none of this sort of, well, I know what it should sound like, kind of coming from the more accomplished person, which would be the producer / engineer. It was more of a, okay, well, what do you need? What do you want? And that's kind of what we did. And because I had more of a say in it and more control over it, it really brought more of that grit out, and more feedback, more bum notes, just things that were not pretty and shiny and perfect, because that's not who we are, And live, we I think we do a good job, but I don't think it's ever been flawless, because it's the sometimes you can't see, sometimes you've had one too many cocktails, who knows. But and then on this one, I really, at first I was terrified of the last one, but then I ended up enjoying it to the end of the process. And on this album, I was like, okay, let's get the same guys back in. And Corey had now joined the band, and he's an engineer as well. He's a great engineer. So I had no idea how good he was. So now I had two guys engineering and bouncing ideas back and forth while I was sort of throwing out what I was hearing. And then the two of them together made it even an even better sounding album, because there was more knowledge. It was two heads were better than one kind of thing. And I really like that I don't know why the music, I think for the most part, I've kind of returned to an angrier sound, because I think that I'm angrier. You would think that the older you get, the more you chill out, and you kind of go, oh, well, I don't really care anymore. But I'm I find that I get more and more upset by things I see and hear and observe, basically, because from an outsider's perspective, and I should say that I despise social media, but I also, on the other hand, understand that it's a marketing tool. So it's not something that is a hypocritical stance. I don't see it as. I don't personally use it for my personal benefit. I don't use it to talk to other people. I don't have other people be able to reach out and touch me personally. There's the firewall of the Seether social media, which is there to, and in this world, unfortunately, there's no way to retroactively return to a time prior to the scourge of social media. It's more, you got to find a balance, and I think for me the balance was to just not even be part of it at all. So. But yeah, so the whole idea has been to some bands, will become softer as they get older, and I think that's a natural progression. But I think we've kind of had some albums in the past where we sort of wrote songs that were more complex, I think, slightly musically, which is not saying much, because none of our stuff's particularly difficult, but it was more experimental, I'd say, at a time. And then I was getting pulled back to the original kind of the feeling that music makes me get when it's riffy and it's angry and it's loud and it's just big, powerful drums. And that's kind of what I was looking for. And that's why on the past two, we've sort of headed back in that direction. And not for nothing, a lot of fans were saying over the years, they're like, man, they always kept saying, Disclaimer was their favorite, or Karma and Effect was the favorite. And I was like, okay, cool. I mean, that's great, but those are now 20-year-old albums. I'd hope that we could do something that would still inspire them now. And for what we have seen, and certainly the response that I've personally or the feedback that I've personally received was that this is exactly what people have been waiting for. And it's kind of like, it's a return to something that was older, like an older type sentiment, but it was also that it's a newer version of that, and it's maybe a little bit more refined, but it's not quite as polished as some albums have been in the past. And that's the goal. Is just to, when you put it on, I want by removing some feedback or a finger squeak, you kind of you take the human aspect out of it. You know what I mean? And we wanted to keep as much of that grit and dirt in there as possible, but also at the same by the same token, presenting it in a way that wasn't gonna destroy your ears.
Well, I can tell you, as a fan of your music, the last two albums have been two of my favorite albums of yours, just because I gravitate towards that sound. And and what you guys are doing. So I've been loving it. This last album, it's one of those albums that I put on the headphones and you can just close your eyes and you just go. It just takes you away.
Yeah.
And you don't find too many of those albums anymore. And this last one was definitely one of them. And
Thanks,
I know
man.
the the wheels were in motion before the pandemic, where you guys were already writing, recording, doing everything.
Yeah.
Before, you guys weren't forced into recording like a lot of bands that were doing that. But did any of that affect what you guys were doing? I mean, you were already ahead of the game, but
Yeah. No, look, we finished a really long, really rough tour at the end of like November of 2018, and it took its toll, I think, on me emotionally, physically. I'd gone really hard with all of the bad stuff because I was just kind of miserable with the way the tours had been structured and how, for example, one of the tours was an international tour, and people always say it must be so great to tour internationally, and it is, but you never see anything. You don't ever see anything beyond the venues and maybe a hotel every once in a while, and mostly the bus. But we did a tour where we arrived in the UK. We did 4 shows, and then we flew to South Africa. We did 1 show. Then we flew to Australia. We did 4 shows in 5 days. Then we flew to New Zealand and did 3 shows in 4 days. Then we flew from New Zealand back to Europe. And then we finished another 3 or 4 weeks just doing Europe at like a breakneck pace. So finally coming home, it felt like, wow, okay, how much more of this can we do? I mean, this is brutal. It was a fun tour because we were opening for Nickelback, and obviously then it's nicer venues, it's bigger venues, bigger crowds, and the guys have never been anything but really kind to us, gracious hosts. So it's a fun thing at one side of it, but they didn't do the international stuff like the Southern Hemisphere stuff. They stayed up in the north, so it was a little easier. But yeah, we just came out of that and I said, I'm not going to touch guitar again. But come January, February of 2019, I really started writing because it doesn't, I can't stay away for too long. So I wrote basically for most of 2019 up until about August of that year. So I had somewhere in the region of 45 to 50 ideas. Then I cut those down to to about 22 ideas. And then when it came to do the album, there were 21 tracks, and I didn't know which ones to leave out. So we recorded them all. We did 21 tracks in I think 16 days, and we basically said, okay, cool. These are the 12 we want on this album, but we're also going to keep some for the next album, possibly, right? Because we want some strong foundation for the next album as well, and we'll see if they ever make it or not. But so the writing was well before, the beginning of societal collapse. But the lyrics were kind of in December, January. So that was when things were starting to reach like a tipping point. So I think there was certainly some stuff that crept in there lyrically and subject matter wise that I was touching upon, because I was really writing from a different perspective. I normally, my previous process has been to have an idea of melody, cadence, and sort of have a couple of words here and there that I like in a line, but I don't ever flesh it out until I get into the studio and I've got 10, 15 minutes to quickly write something out. And you let the sort of stream of consciousness stuff take over and you just write, and then it's a pretty interesting snapshot of what's going on in your head at the time. Because if I look back at some lyrics, I'm like, holy cow, there's some dark stuff in there, and I wasn't, and that's what's interesting. But this one, I wanted to sort of embrace that, and I sat and literally wrote lyrics, listening to the song over and over again, wrote lyrics, changed lyrics, adjusted things here and there, and really wanted the lyrics to have as much attention as the music it had, because normally that's not the case. And I think, yes, again, subconsciously, even though I wasn't writing necessarily about something specific regarding all of the other subject matter, I think any one song could touch on 10 different subjects. You know what I mean? There's never really, but I present them in such a way that it feels like it's possibly just one subject. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting venting system. But yeah, so there's nothing was really written about, let's say, 2020. But now, seeing as we basically, I spent 2020 at the bottom of a vodka bottle because it was just miserable. And I was, I realized that we hit January. I was like, man, what a waste of a year. I could have done so many things. Look, I got to spend time with my wife and my kid, and that was awesome, right? And seeing my daughter go from a little babbler to somebody who now has these, very, very interesting conversations for a 3.5-year-old about, the world in general and the dreams. It's just this cool thing I've got to experience, because usually I would have missed a few months, if not most of the months of the year, and I wouldn't have seen all of that growth. So that's been the silver lining. But as I said, we've turned a corner this year, and I think I'm starting to write stuff again now, possibly because who knows? Looks like 2021's a blowout for touring. So we may never even get to tour this album. You know what I mean? We'll certainly get to play some singles from it, but I don't know that we'll ever get to tour on the back of this album. So the way I see it is, well, maybe I need to look forward and look to maybe in the early to middle part of 2022, have another album ready to go. And that will definitely be, I think, influenced heavily by everything that we see around us. So I don't know that I'm going to necessarily jump on the pandemic bandwagon as much as I'm going to jump on the mental health of everybody that's crumbling. You know what I mean? It's kind of and again the lack of tolerance for diversity of view and thought, and that's kind of a scary thing to see, because I've never been a very politically correct person, but in the world we live in, there's not much I can say. You know what I mean? Because everybody finds themselves so easily offended, even if offense was never meant. But so it's a weird time to live in, because I refuse to censor my lyrics, obviously. So I'll still say what I want to say, like, because if I don't, then I'm not being honest, and that's the thing. So I also don't want to be honest, but an edited and abbreviated version of honest. I want lyrics to be what I'm trying to say. So it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out, because I think that there's certainly a lot of subject matter to grab inspiration from. So we'll see how it turns out. But unfortunately, those lyrics were before, but they seem to apply to you know what I mean? It's and then, again, that's just weird,
Yeah, just like the title. So the album came out in August, so it's been 6 months now, and you're talking about, possibly not touring for this album. But are you maybe thinking of doing a big live stream type thing like a lot of bands have been doing?
Yeah, we've just sort of wrecked our brains, and we've now got a great new management team that we actually just signed on with yesterday. So it's still pretty fresh, but things are moving. And the main focus that we've identified for us this year is to go digital as much as possible, and focus on the platforms that we can reach people with, and we can keep our fans interested, and to really be involved with that more, as far as us as the band guys, rather than hiring a PR company to do it for us. You know what I mean? Because I find then that sometimes the tone can come across as a little bit disingenuous. Not that that's the intention, but it's not how we would say stuff. You know what I mean? We want it to be more from us to the fans, and so that's going to be the major focus for us. I think certainly streams will be a big part of it, but they won't look like we did it in the past. I think that we're going to try and find more interesting ways, maybe sort of more, guerrilla tactic aspects of it, where it's not all, we keep it gritty, and we keep it real, and we keep it something that represents where we're at, how that looks, I don't know. Where we do that, I don't know. So there's a bunch of things that we have to figure out, but it's fairly set in stone from what we've heard, and from what agents have heard, and business management, what everyone's basically heard. There's some places you can go play shows, make no mistake. You can go to Australia, but once you get there, you have to quarantine for 14 days in the country before you can even play shows, right?
Yeah.
So that's a pain in the butt if you're not making tons of money. So I think New Zealand is the same. Europe, obviously, South Africa shut down. America, basically, now they're talking about trying to block access to Florida. I mean, it's the world's gone insane, is what I'm saying.
Yes,
so
I agree.
So what we need to then do is focus on, okay, how can we keep engaging our fans? How can we keep them engaged in what we are doing, and entertain them in this while there's nothing else going on? Because the other side of that coin is you can go out and you can maybe do some kinds of shows, but it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to go to a drive-in movie theater and have 300 cars that are 150 feet away from the stage. You don't really have production, but you kind of, you play some songs. You don't see the fans. You can't interact with them. And certainly Dale and Corey like to point and jump and high five and and then when you're done, what are they going to flash the lights or honk the horns? Is that's it just doesn't it's so bizarre and I find that would be playing shows for the sake of playing and not really. I would find that less engaging with a crowd than it would be if we just focus on our socials. As much as I just like them, but and start making some funny, cool content that we are really enthusiastic about and passionate about. So that's kind of the goal. I think streaming will be a thing. Certainly, if you look on any of those websites, man, everyone's streaming all the time now. I don't know, I in fact, but here's the thing: as streaming is it's okay, right? I love Seven Dust, and I watched Seven Dust the other day, and it was awesome, man. It looked cool, the lights were great, they sounded great, but it was like, but I'm sitting on my couch. And I'm not feeling the music. I'm not feeling the beat. I'm not, I'm watching those guys throwing down, and I just felt I loved it, but then there's just this twinge of sadness because it can't stay that way, man. It can't. This can't be what we end up becoming. Because I've spent so many times on the side of the stage or in the crowd with that band that it's a completely different experience. And so on one hand, while I really appreciated that they were streaming and I could see them play, and I think they played their first album, which is kind of what I think the approach we'll do is we'll do streams where we do an entire album, you know what I mean, and basically just kind of do things like that. But it was awesome. It was missing the most important part, which is that tangible feeling where your body's vibrating and it's like that can never be replaced. And well, I guess maybe in the future they'll come up with some kind of technology where you can put on for example, I got a haptic feedback vest from my mother-in-law, and it's like this. Originally, it's meant for gamers, and you throw it on and you plug it in, and the vest will vibrate whenever you get shot or whatever what happens in the game. So it's kind of cool, man. So I said, well, let me check what music was. So I threw on my this vest, I put on my headphones, and I plugged in and I played one of our songs, and man, it was like. It felt like you were at a show because everything's bouncing and the kick drum's hitting you in the chest. So, but those things, they're not easy to come by, and it shouldn't, that would be the closest I could get. I could watch a band play live and have that thing could be kind of maybe feel like you were there, but still not going to be the same thing. There's none of the smells, there's none of the cheering, the whole experience that we've all grown so accustomed to. So, yeah, we'll do a lot of digital stuff this year because that's going to be really the safest. Because let's be honest. I mean, there certainly are places that are booking shows right now, and it's a possibility that we may play some festivals, which would be awesome. But you got those hysterical voices and whatever the Karens and the Carls or whatever that consider any kind of gathering a super spreader event, and I certainly don't want to be accused of anything like that. I'm too old to be yelled at by people that are terrified of being alive. I just if we can find a way to do it in such a way that it's considered to be liability free on our end, that would be because we just live in a world where it's so volatile, and so we have to be smart about it, and we really have to brainstorm and either build on things that are currently working for other bands and have worked for us, or find new and improved ways to do things. So, but digital is going to be a huge part of 2021 because, man, there's been no good news coming down the pipeline as far as reopening like it used to,
Well, listen, Shaun, I feel like I could talk to you another hour. I feel like I could sit here and just talk to you all day, but I know you got to go. We all got stuff to do. We all have a life, but I want to thank you first of all for chatting with me today. The album CV's Pacem Parabellum is out. We're playing the latest single, Bruce and Bloody. We've been on that, and man. I love that tune. It is a great tune, and I look forward to more success with this album and to whatever you guys are going to be doing in the future. I'm following, man. I'm following.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for having me, brother. I appreciate you having me.
Good chatting with you. Take care.
See you.